So, the big question here is how should we present our data? How should we present information? There are transparent ways of presenting data, and there are ways that obscure the data. And there are ways that sort of hide what's really going on in the data. And we're going to try to talk about transparent ways of presenting the data. Tufte is a professor of political science at Yale. He used to be at Princeton, published, empirical work in political science for a while, but he was always really good at and really interested in graphical depiction of data. And then eventually that sort of became his day job. And actually what's neat about Tufte's book is it's much more than just a book about sort of graphic design. Like, there are elements of graphic design, like what looks good. Like some of that's in there, for sure. But there's also sophisticated discussion of causality and research design at various points in the book. There's also a big transparency thrust throughout, and we'll see that in sort of his principles and his bullet points about accurate ways of conveying information and data. And that sort of is a thread that is found throughout the book. These are a set of issues that I see as kind of related to transparency points. So among his 8 or 9 principles, he says, show the data. Like, that is a pretty simple but important thing to do. Like, when we see empirical papers or statistical analyses where we don't really see the raw data in any form, we don't see a scatter plot, we don't see any sort of relational graph between variables, I think Tufte would say maybe our antennae should sort of perk up a little bit. Like, I want to see the data, I want to see patterns in the data, and I think the best empirical work in the social sciences and in other fields is characterized by a certain openness about what the data looks like and what it is. So showing the data is important. Avoid distorting the data. A graphic should serve a reasonably clear purpose. And he lists out, it might be descriptive, it might be trying to capture a certain causal relationship with a certain research design, it may have some other goal, but when you look at it, it should be clear, or with a sort of figure description, it should be clear what the goal of the figure is. And then 4, it should induce the reader to think about the substance. So there should be more than just some sort of statistical exercise involved. There should be a link to something important, something that matters, something substantive. And this is one of the points that comes through the book again and again and again, that effective graphics are much more than just art or much more than sort of putting statistics in an image. There has to be a real depth of sort of intellectual understanding to create a good graphic. So that's something that comes through. Okay, so these are really transparency-related points that I think are good general principles. Then there's a second set of issues that, I guess, speak to other issues. One value of graphics, and we'll come up with, show examples of this in a second, is they allow you to absorb lots of data. They make large data sets coherent. You can present a lot in a small space. You can present a lot more data in less space. Good graphics or figures also reveal patterns in the data, potentially at different levels of detail. Sometimes you get at different geographic aggregation, sometimes different time scales are revealed all within one graphic. They encourage the eye to compare different pieces of data. Of course, that's natural and much easier to do sometimes in a figure than in a table. And this is the last point. We'll come to this sort of at the very end of the lecture today, that good graphics are able to integrate a lot of different elements. Good graphics integrate words, verbal descriptions. They integrate statistical concepts and statistical, coefficient estimates. And then there's certain visual patterns they bring out. So some of the most effective graphics are, in some sense, quite complicated. But the art, of course, in this is conveying that complicated information in a way that's comprehensible. So these are just some ideas. We're going to go through these, not exactly one at a time, but we're going to touch on these in the course of the lecture with specific examples. And I think the hope of this is, A, to make us all think about our own research and our own figures and incorporate some of these ideas into our work, both in terms of making our figures and our tables, too, more effective at doing what they're supposed to do and more transparent.